Hello, hello, and happy Wednesday. A couple of weeks ago, I posted a video where I believe, if I'm not wrong, that I was working on a landscape and I painted some golden trees. I kind of took a little bit of a detour, had to fix that painting, and it was a bit of a struggle, but I managed to turn it around. I think at the beginning of that video, I mentioned that I had been feeling a little flustered because I had started another painting that I worked on and I sort of had to leave it aside because I wasn't really too sure what to do with that painting. So this week, that's the painting I'm tackling. And I'd like to say it was less of a challenge because I am feeling better, but it was still a challenge. And the reason why I've decided to post the video regardless is that I want to make it clear to everyone out there that it's not always easy to create paintings that we find beautiful. I think I have found some endearing qualities to this painting once it was finished. There are parts of it that I actually really like at this point. But it's been a journey and it's been a challenge to get through the process and not give up on this painting. And I think a lot of you have mentioned that you find it helpful when I talk about these struggles because you have them as well. And I want you to know that it is normal to have these struggles. And in fact, not only is it normal, I think it may be even important for us to have these challenges. Because when we're struggling through the process of creating a painting that we are holding on to the hope we'll be able to turn into something beautiful, we are learning a ton. We're learning a lot about what we like and what we don't like. And that goes with everything, whether it be the colors we've applied, the marks we've made, the composition, how we used value contrast, etc., etc. So there is a ton to learn in creating quote unquote ugly art. We usually learn the best when we are going through something challenging. So it's through our mistakes and our struggles that we learn a lot about who we are as artists. And so it's important for us to have these moments. If everything always went super well, whenever we'd be met with something challenging, we would probably just want to give up. And I want you to know that it's better if you don't. I've had my moments where I do want to give up. I almost gave up on this one. I was gonna paint something else and then I thought, no, you know what, you need to address this one. I had kind of put it off long enough and I felt like, what's the point of me starting something new when there is a painting that has been started that has the potential to turn into something that's just sitting there waiting for me to look at it. So that's what I did, and I'm gonna share this process with you today. So I don't know exactly how relaxing this will be. Hopefully it still will be relaxing for you. I don't think it was one of those pull the hair out of my head kind of struggles. It was more of a struggle that led me down a road of curiosity. The curiosity to explore the different options I would have in order to change the painting and create something I would like better than what I had initially started with. And so I hope I can instill in you the importance of how helpful it can be to be curious and to be willing to explore and to be flexible to move with the different things that happen in our creative process. That's it. I feel like I've said a whole lot and hopefully I haven't scared anyone from watching. I hope you'll enjoy this process. I hope you'll learn something from it. And if not, I hope you'll at least enjoy giggling with me, because I think I'll have a few giggle moments. A few giggle worthy moments, definitely. Oh, all right, so that's it. Let's get going. When I started this painting process a few weeks ago, I wanted it to be a textured mixed media art piece. And so I wanted to create some circles. I love circles and they tend to show up quite a bit in my artwork. And I thought this would be a relatively good way for me to start. If you start with something you like, you're likely to, I get more creative sparks, and your intuition will just kind of kick in and guide you along the way. So that's kind of why I wanted to start with creating some circles. So I'm adding circles first with my pencil, and then I'm going to come in with my watercolor ground and I'm going to add some texture to the background. When it comes to adding texture with watercolor ground, the possibilities are almost endless. There are so many ways we can add texture, and I really love playing with this medium. But for this painting, I really wanted to keep it relatively simple and mostly use color to make the painting more interesting. Now I'm coming in with an old chopstick that I've used for mark making in the past, and I'm just etching some little circles into the watercolor ground that is not yet dry. My watercolor ground is pretty old, and so it's relatively dry already before it's even applied to my paper. And that means I need to work very quickly when I'm adding these little marks in the watercolor ground, because it is already starting to set and it's becoming more and more difficult to create more texture. So the faster you can create your marks or etch into your watercolor ground, the better. Once I'm done adding my marks and etch marks into the watercolor ground, I will let the whole thing dry completely before I move on to adding color. I looked at my watercolor palette for a good long time before finally making the choice to work with a magenta. And this may be where I went down a bit of a slippery slope. It's a very bright color. It's a beautiful color, a color that mixes well with other colors and a color that I really love. But I don't believe I have ever really started a color with this much magenta before. So I created a bit of a challenge for myself by starting with this color. And from that point on, I needed to figure out how I was going to change things. But like I've said in the beginning of the video, it's good to challenge ourselves. It's good for us to try different things, um, and to figure out ways to work around or through what we have first put down on paper. And so I'm loving this color, but yeah, it feels like it's going to be a little bit too much. And I knew this, but I still kept going, and I'm glad I did in a sense. I could have done something different, but I, if I'm always doing the same thing, how am I going to ever learn anything new? So that's kind of where I decided to continue going down this road. Because the magenta was a relatively, or is a relatively cool color, I wanted to sort of warm things up, and I decided to add some quinacridone deep gold to the mix. And I think this color was or is a little bit too much, or too similar to the magenta, being that they're very closely related on the color wheel. And it would have maybe worked out better had I decided to go with a blue or something that would have contrasted with the magenta more. Now, I'm not 100% sure at this point whether I like it or don't like it. I'm just kind of not not sure. I'm really not sure. And I think it's okay because it is achieving what I wanted to achieve. I wanted to warm things up, and that quinacridone deep gold is definitely a warmer color. And at the same time, it feels too much like the magenta. I know it's not exactly like the magenta, but it feels like they're too related or something. I don't know. So it's, yeah, the challenges started pretty early on this one, hence why at one point I had to set it aside. I really backed myself kind of into a corner, and it seemed like the more I added to the painting, the more I kept backing myself into that corner. Oh, live and learn, as they say. I added salt to the magenta once I was done applying it, and I'm also going to add it here to the quinacridone deep gold. I do think the salt can add even more interesting texture, and where the textures created by the watercolor ground are relatively simple in this case, I thought maybe adding a little bit of salt would help. And I don't think it was necessarily a bad thing, because I find that it can actually create really nice marks in the paint that will then, when I add more color, have some interesting effects. But yeah, I'm still not feeling it 100%. So I decided to start adding some blue, because the blue will really contrast. It's a complementary color to the colors that are in the painting right now. And I do find that even just adding a little bit of this phthalo turquoise, that it is changing the look of things. It does seem more interesting, because there is something different happening, and to me that is already looking better. Even though the paper and my background were dry before I started adding the turquoise, for some reason the paint is spreading. And I don't know if this is because maybe I didn't wait quite long enough for the watercolor ground to dry completely, or what's going on there. But for whatever reason, that's happening. And though I don't usually mind it too much if the color spreads, it's not really spreading in a way that I'm totally digging at this point. So I'm probably going to want to do something about that, because yeah, there's something about it that's kind of irking me. And I'll just put it out there also that when I was painting this initially, when I started this painting, I was also not feeling very well. So a lot of what was going on with me personally, with my health, was probably putting me in a bit of a funky mood and making it a little bit more challenging for me to paint. And so it's hard to look at things objectively when you're not feeling well. Having had a chance to step back from it, I'm looking at it now and it doesn't seem all that bad. But I am glad that I had decided to use my water bottle to sort of spread that turquoise a little bit more, so that it's not so concentrated in these little tiny areas. I think we need a little, or I need a little bit more of that color in the painting, because it is providing a nice contrast to the magenta and the quinacridone burnt orange, or sorry, deep gold.
Watercolors, of course, tend to dry much more muted than they are when they are first applied. And so I always start by adding a bit of color and then I come in and intensify my colors in subsequent layers. And that's what I'm doing right now. I've actually moved on to adding some nickel azo yellow into my circles because it's a really nice bright color, and it's actually a color that doesn't seem to lose its vibrancy after it dries, or at least not too much. And I love working with this color, especially when I want to warm things up in a painting. I was feeling also as though the warm quinacridone deep gold that I added to my painting was really concentrated in only a few areas in my painting in the circles. And in order to keep things cohesive, I decided it would probably be a good idea to add a little bit more of that color in other areas in the painting. And I do think it is helping to warm things up and even brighten things up in a way that I am actually liking. As I'm working, I'm often working between layers of color and having to take some time away from the painting, letting things dry, and then coming back to it. So after I let these first few layers of color dry, I came back to the painting and I asked myself what I felt was missing. And at that point, for me, the answer was dark value contrast. And so I wanted to darken certain areas of the painting to add some more dark contrast. And I've decided to do that by adding some more phthalo turquoise in a less diluted form. Adding some value contrast is definitely helping me feel better about the painting. So now I'm kind of in the process of trying to figure out where else I can add this contrast so that the more medium contrast in the painting can take a step back and I can add something darker to really make those colors pop and stand out more. Still hungry for some more value contrast. I decided to add some splatters of the phthalo turquoise. And I think splatters are helpful in a lot of paintings. I really like adding them, but it might have been a bit too early for me to do that because now I'm adding them. And honestly, as I was adding them, I was really starting to feel like it was making the paintings look too busy. Ah, yes. And so, I guess I could have just taken a paper towel and blotted it off before letting it dry, but I decided to sort of leave it and see if I could do something else to sort of detract from those splatters. And what I decided to do is add some mauve or purple around the circles. So I'm adding a little bit of water first, and then I'm coming in with paint straight from the color pan, and I'm going to add some of that mauve because it's dark. I think it's a color that will go well with the painting because, of course, the blues and the magentas mixing together create some purples. So there are some little hints of purple here and there in the painting. And I thought that adding this mauve would help. And I do think it helps somewhat because it is creating more dark value contrast. And as much as it's helping, it still doesn't feel like enough. I think I'm like, as I was going through this process, I was struggling and I was trying to force the process to happen. And sometimes when you force things to happen, they don't necessarily go the way you want them to or the way you hope they will. So that was a lesson for me to sort of like pay attention to what's going on within me and how I'm feeling. And when I start to feel like I'm forcing things to happen instead of letting them happen and letting them flow, then it might be a good time for me to step away from the painting process. After adding this mauve is when I finally figured out that it was high time for me to pay attention to how I was feeling and listen to my intuition, who was telling me you're forcing the process. Let it go. And so I decided after doing this that I would let it go. And I actually let it go for a few weeks. And sometimes we need that. So it's now the end of September, and I am just now getting the courage and the oomph to start working on this painting again. And like I mentioned before, I honestly, seriously considered giving up on it altogether. I wasn't really very crazy about what I had created thus far in this painting process, and I was having a hard time seeing how I could turn it around to get it to a point where I would actually like what was presenting on paper. And so I had to let it go. I had to let it go until now. And funny enough, when I finally came back to the painting process, I did the very thing, the last thing I thought could potentially be my next step, and that is to add this black ink around my circles. I knew I wanted to add some more value contrast, and I knew black would potentially help me do that. I think I was just feeling exhausted and depleted at that point, and I was feeling like I was forcing it. Now I'm at a point where I actually feel a desire to try and turn this painting around, and I think that is more likely for me to lead me in the right direction. I want to clarify what I said about things heading in the right direction. What I mean by that is not so much that it's going to necessarily end up with me creating the most amazing painting I've ever created. But more so, it's heading in the right direction from the perspective that I am not feeling like I'm forcing things at this point. I'm actually wanting to work through this painting process, and I'm wanting to explore solutions. And that is what I'm doing. I'm trying different things and I'm sort of feeling them on and seeing how I feel about them, and then deciding whether or not I want to continue with the various things I'm trying. And sometimes that's the best thing I can do for my painting process. So I'm happy I'm in a place where I want to explore solutions, where I want to try new things and see if I can figure out a way to bring this painting into a place where I like it better. And I am open to it being great, and I'm also open to it turning out not so good. And I think it's a good place for me to be because I am not attached to the outcome at this point as much as I was attached to the outcome when I think I first started this painting process. And sometimes it's that attachment to the outcome that actually ends up making it more challenging for us to work through some issues because we are so worried that we're not going to get to that outcome that we sort of freeze and we don't give ourselves the space to explore potential solutions. So, hopefully, this all makes sense. And I hope that there's something in there that that you can relate with and maybe find valuable. So I started working on this painting again by adding some dark value contrast, mainly by adding some black ink around my circles. Then I started adding a little bit more black ink. Not sure I was 100% feeling those little black dots because, again, like I said before, when I was first creating the painting, when I added the splatters of that dark paint, it felt like it was making it too busy. So adding the black dots was a little bit like doing that. So that's okay though. I needed to try it on to know that it really wasn't necessarily speaking to me. If I hadn't tried it, I would have never known that. So then I decided, well, I've explored the dark value contrast. Why not explore adding some lighter value contrast? And that's why I brought out my white pen. The white dots that I'm creating right now may be adding a little bit to the busyness of the painting, but they are also speaking to me more than the little black dots I created around my little circles. So that is, I feel, nudging me in a direction that feels better for me. And so when I'm exploring and playing with different marks and trying things on, seeing how I feel about them, that's when I start getting more nudges from my intuition as to the direction I can continue to work on the painting. So remember, I'm in the process of exploring my marks and my colors, and I'm really working on finding a solution. And there may or may not be a solution, but what I do know is that as I am working, I am seeing how things are feeling with me as I'm applying these different marks and these different colors to my painting. I'm liking the gold I'm adding at this point, but it's because it's against the quinacridone deep gold, it's not standing out very much, and so it doesn't seem to do a whole lot. But then I add it to those turquoise little circles, and it starts to speak to me more. Gold, of course, has a tendency to stand out more when it is applied over a color that it is complementary to the gold, or a dark color that contrasts well with the gold. And so after applying this gold to the little turquoise circles, I thought it might be good to also explore the possibility of adding the gold to some of the texture that is near some of the darker colors in the paint. And I really like the effect that that is having. Since I was liking the effect of the gold on top of the turquoise, why not add some more of that turquoise to the center of my circles, right next to those rings of gold that I created? And just having done that, I'm already liking my circles better. It makes the gold pop more, and definitely adds a little bit more dark value contrast, and makes the circles a little bit more interesting and not just, I guess, flat is the word that's coming to mind. I don't know that it's actually the right word, but it gives them more dimension. And so I am definitely liking that more. At every part of my process at this point, and since I started painting or working on this painting again, I have been asking myself, what is it I feel the painting needs more of or less of as I'm working? And that question came up again right after I added the gold, and it was still that I needed a little bit more contrast, and I felt like I needed to also maybe create a bit of a focal point by adding a darker color to one side of the painting instead of everything being so uniform. I wanted to make part of the painting stand out a little bit more by adding some dark value contrast and changing things up a little bit on that side. And so that's why I decided to add this dark blackberry color to the painting. Um, it's something I'm trying. Am I 100% sure about it? No, I'm not really 100% sure on most of the things I do in my paintings, but I always try to push myself to try on new things. And oftentimes when I do that, I discover a new thing that I really like, or a new way of either contrasting colors or adding color or adding a mark. And that helps me for future paintings because now I have something else in my tool of mark making and color adding and composition that can help me on different paintings. I've added a little bit more light value contrast with some white and some gold, and now I'm adding a little bit more of the dark value contrast with some black ink. And I can't say at this point that I really am in love with this painting, but I definitely have learned a lot. And in my creative processes, one thing I have definitely learned is that sometimes what helps for me to figure out how I truly feel about the painting and whether or not it's actually complete is for me to remove the tape. because the tape has like a messy edge that I personally don't really like, and I find that sometimes that detracts from how I really feel about the painting. And so removing the tape can help me decide whether I want to leave it as it is or add something else to the painting. I definitely like it more without the tape, and I definitely like it more than I did when I first started working again, working on this painting again. Um, and I'm feeling at the same time that I need to add maybe a little bit more gold, especially in that area where I added the dark ink. I want to sort of like delineate that area a little bit better again as I am using it sort of as a focal point. And so I'm adding a little bit of gold, not really in a very straight line. I'm just trying to keep it relatively organic, kind of like the rest of the painting is. And then I think I'll be ready to call this painting finished. I'm really happy I gave myself a chance to continue working on this painting. Though it's not necessarily a painting I'm in love with, I do actually like it at this point. And there are some parts of it that I love, like this area right here. I love those little raised edges with the dark paint underneath and how the gold makes all of that texture stand out. I also love my circles with the different marks that are in there and how the colors really sort of make those circles pop. But what I figured out is that I like the painting more when I look at it horizontally. So that's another something I figured out. And really, there was so much for me to learn in this painting process that it would have been a shame for me to just let it go and maybe chuck that initial painting into the garbage bin. So I'm glad I stuck it out. And if you were able to stick this out with me and you're still here, I want to say a huge thank you. I hope you learned a few things, especially regarding how you can push through some challenging parts in a painting. Thank you again for making the time to join me on my creative journey. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating, sweet friends.